So for the second series of our Audiophile Blueprint series, second episode of it, we'll start out with absolute sound. What is absolute sound and can it be attained? So we finished off here at the first episode, and just recapping that if you are going for that absolute sound, it's like leaping off a cliff into the dark. It looks really cool, it sounds really cool, but it's pretty stupid and pointless. Why? Here's why. If you are addicted to sound and you chase sonic perfection, then you will end up with something like this. I just chose here a random $1 million speaker. It's a horn speaker, and as you can see here, it's really overdone. So you will end up spending a lot of money. It's monstrously huge. It doesn't fit in any normal living room, and if it would, then you would have really severe issues listening to this speaker, because there's gigantic distance between the drivers, and that really does a number on the sound staging. However, this is not such a bad speaker. You could use it, for example, in a movie theater, put it behind the projection screen, and if you are sitting, let's say, like 15 meters or 50 feet away from them, then you probably will have a pretty decent, pretty good experience. However, as far as absolute sound goes, when you reach this category of $1 million+ speakers, then they get there by overdoing some aspect of speaker design, which will give some tremendous boost at one level, but that also comes with significant drawbacks. So basically, realistic speaker design, like really good speakers, starts at about, I don't know, maybe like $15,000 and ends around $100,000. So if you want reliable, good speakers that you would consider as top sound or balanced, really good performer, it would be in that price range. If you go lower, then you compromise on build quality, and if you go higher, then there's more marketing, more hype, more fancy schmancy in it than really technology and common sense. So let's go to what happens when we are obsessed with measurements. And this happens to a lot of us, especially those who have a science background and are scientists, like mathematicians, physicists, even physicians, molecular biologists like myself. And we tend to overthink it and think that if you have, like, for example, here a perfect square wave, then if your amp can do that, it can measure a perfect square wave, then it will have perfect sound. And I would like to mention for you guys, this includes me, because I'm also coming partly from this background, that if you are obsessed with measurements and how they translate to sonic performance, these three guys here are the apostles of measurements for amplifiers. So Dan D'Agostino is considered something of a demigod in audio. He builds the most coveted, most expensive solid-state amplifiers, and he is really big on measurements. And lately he said that now his newest amplifiers have much higher harmonic distortion and much lower feedback than he used to use, and they sound much better. So if Dan says that, who is the leader of the industry basically, and he's a wonderful scientist, then all of us science-minded guys should really heed his advice that if you are in your books, in your specs, and you don't listen for the sound, why on earth are you in audio? Then just get out of here and go for something like PCR equipment design. You know what this is? This is what scientists think as an audio amplifier. So for an audio amplifier, we measure them how good their THD is and how good their damping factor is. And it's measured not with speakers but with resistors. So all of our spec sheets are basically measuring whether your audio amplifier is as good as a PCR machine, which is a controlled temperature heater and cooler. Except that our audio amplifiers can only heat, they cannot cool. This device does a much better job at heating, and it can also cool. And you can buy one for now for a couple $100, and it will absolutely trash even $1 million solid state amps which measure the best. So if you go for measurements to drive a heating element the most precisely, get out of here, buy a freaking PCR machine, and instead of audio, get into designing PCR business, because that's what suited the best for that type of approach. So going back to our audio people, there's Nelson Past and Bob Carver who really spend their lives on measurements and measuring amplifiers and building them. Especially Nelson Past, he did really wonderful work on measuring amplifiers and trying to relate what that does to sound, and he has a website with tremendous information. Go and check him out. Bob Carver, he's a legend. He built really solid, indestructible amplifiers, really high power ones. And all of these people know that better measurement doesn't translate to better sound. There is a correlation that very poor measurements do correlate with poor sound, but if the measurement is too good, that also correlates with poor sound. So the truth is in between. This is like THD is like body temperature. If it's too high, you have a problem. If it's too low, like 0% THD, body temperature too low, it means you are in a morgue. So not good. And stepping next on to speakers, John Atkinson, he has measured almost 1,000 high-end speakers. And he has also concluded, based on the measurements, he tried to correlate them how those speakers sound, and he is the #1 authority in the world who can do that, because he has done measurements himself. He has listened to these speakers himself, and he has concluded that the measurements can separate a good speaker from a bad speaker, but based on measurements, you cannot tell whether it's a good speaker or a great speaker. So basically, for all of us who come with a scientific background, my message is that measurements are good for troubleshooting. And this is for the engineer, not the end user. So if you are an engineer, based on the measurements, you can tell if you messed up with the design. If it measures too bad or it measures too good, you messed up with the sound, brother. It has to go back on the drawing board. And for speakers, you don't know if you have a great sounding speaker, but with measurements you can tell if there are major flaws in your equipment or not. I mean, in your speaker or not. So there's people who do not care about perfect sound, which doesn't exist, and there are people who do not who are not obsessed with measurements. So why are they into audio? They're into audio because of the music. Like for example, you love to listen to the violin or a full orchestra, or you love to hear vocals, or you are just absolutely have to hear your daily dose of jazz, like daily Miles Davis, and you cannot go to bed without John Coltrane. That happens. And in this case, you already know what you want. So if you want Dizzy Gillespie, and then you can fine-tune your search for equipment that play jazz well. So when you read reviews, then do not go for speakers that were selected for measuring best for chamber orchestra or chamber music, but go for speakers where the reviewers tested them on jazz. I'll give you an example for that. There's one review channel which is really popular, the Audiophile, and when he tests his speakers and amps and other components, he always showcases them in his reviews with that music that equipment played best. So if he tells you that there are these speakers whom he thinks it's the speakers of the year, and then before buying those speakers, if you want to buy those based on his recommendation, then check out his review when he reviewed those speakers, and whether he said good things about it when he listened to electronic music, or he was listening to piano or violin or jazz. So if he doesn't mention jazz during the review, then those speakers are not for you. Probably they fared not good in jazz if he doesn't mention it. And that's him. So he wants to present what things can do well, and often reviewers do that. So I'm giving you just a heads up that there's a so what they do not mention counts as much as what they mention, and they try to not to say bad things, so they focus on the positives, and you should take those reviews on the merit of the positives that were mentioned. And if something wasn't mentioned, that might be neutral, or probably it's not so good. So that's a grain of salt to take for online reviews. And also, if you know what kind of music you want to listen to, that's super crucial, because for example chamber music or solo violin has a totally different systems requirement than jazz or house or electronic music. Like you want to have rave parties or AC/DC parties, then that requires a totally different system than jazz. And people often tell you that the best systems in the world play jazz and everything else is secondary. And for example techno or trance or whatever music doesn't sound as good because it's not good recording quality, and when you put it into a really high quality system, it will show the flaws of the recording. Actually they are right and they are wrong at the same time. I want to mention an audio channel. His name is Real Hi-Fi Help, and he calls these systems that behave in such a way that they can only play one thing, they are optimized for high resolution jazz and nothing else. He calls this pretend hi-fi, and it pretends because it pretends to be high fidelity, but truly it has I'm not saying it's not, but it uses gimmicks and tricks to enhance resolution, enhance details, because in jazz you basically have the drum section, and then you have the horns, the brass, and there's not much mid-range information in it. So and the violin is the total opposite. So there it's all about the tone. You need to have pure tone, and there's not the high frequency information is very different compared to trumpets and saxophones. And so this system that can play jazz, that is optimized for jazz, is often overdone, like an overdone cake. So it means that there are built-in colorations into the system that enhance the sound of the saxophone, enhance the drums, and they do it with special equalization, special use of drivers, of the crossover, and they use the phase to tease out details that you cannot hear in real life. And that's what makes it so catchy and so popular, and you have the impression that you are listening to real high fidelity, high quality hi-fi, because you are getting a tremendous amount of information that honestly you are not getting at a real live show. So you listen to the same thing real life, it does not sound the same. It sounds very different compared to such a so-called pretend hi-fi system. And that under pretend hi-fi, he and I, we don't mean something that is like a $500 system and it pretends to be. No, I'm talking about $1 million systems, but they are not natural, not balanced systems, but they are specialized to do one thing. So they are like a one-trick pony. They are pretty darn good at that one trick, but they fail at this trick, they fail at this trick, they absolutely fail at this trick, and they completely fail at playing records from the 50s, for example. So if you have a wide music appreciation, you want to listen to all kinds of music, then I have a bad news for you. You are in for a very tough ride, because you will need a very special system that can play everything. If you just go, for example, you want to have a house party, then in that case, if you get a really beefy solid state amp that can just pump out tons of watts, you will have a pretty decent experience, but it will utterly fail you for giving you a credible classical experience, and for jazz it will just blow your ears if you try to listen to a saxophone solo in that. Let's go. So place all music at the first spot always, and then you can start building your system. Thank you for watching, and that's all, folks.